A man dreams that his daughter is alive. He runs to the cemetery and sees her grave unearthed. As he approaches, he is horrified by what he sees. Robert Wallace sat at his usual spot in the local coffee shop, watching the world go by through the foggy window. The taste of the same coffee he'd been ordering for years, bland yet comforting, lingered in his mouth. His gray eyes observed the passing bustle with a tired yet attentive gaze. Here, he was Robert Wallace, a familiar face, a retiree, a quiet widower. His day-to-day routine was as comfortable as the worn-out armchair in his small, tidy living room. Robert would take his early morning walks in the park, greet his neighbors, watch the sunrise, and listen to the birds. Yet, behind the peaceful humdrum of his mundane life was a story penned in the ink of loss and despair. The city of Stanleyville knew Robert as a retired school teacher, a resilient man who had faced his share of life's tragedies. His wife, Clara, had passed away a decade ago, leaving a void in his life that no sunrise or birdsong could fill. The town whispered about the Wallaces with a respectful hush, recalling how they lost their only child, Emily, to a car accident 5 years after Clara's death. Emily's memory was more vivid to Robert than his own reflection. She had her mother's smile, her sparkling eyes filled with an insatiable curiosity about the world. Robert cherished these memories, but they were painful reminders of what he had lost. One particular night, as the familiar silence of his house weighed heavily on him, Robert found himself trapped in a hauntingly vivid dream. In it, he was back at the park where he used to walk with Emily. It was a beautiful sunny day, and he could hear her laughter echoing through the air. He turned to see Emily, alive and radiant, running towards him, her arms wide open. "Emily," he gasped, feeling a rush of warmth as he embraced her. He could smell her favorite lavender perfume, feel the texture of her hair under his aged fingers. Emily pulled back, her eyes sparkling with life. "Daddy, I need to tell you something important," she started, her voice urgent. Suddenly, a force pulled him away from her, the world blurred, and he woke up with a jolt. His heart pounded in his chest as he gasped for breath, clutching onto the sheets. He looked around the room, half expecting to see Emily there. But all he met was the bitter reality of his loneliness. The dream left him rattled and wide awake in the stillness of the night. He replayed the dream in his mind, wondering why Emily had appeared so real, why she was trying to tell him something. A sense of desperation clawed at his heart. He yearned for answers, for some understanding of what the dream meant. Robert's ordinarily comfortable world had been intruded upon by a potent memory, a vivid dream that refused to fade with the waking of the day. Something within him was disturbed, setting the stage for a mystery he felt compelled to solve. Unbeknownst to him, his life was about to take an unexpected turn, a turn that would test his resolve and courage. The first light of dawn peeked in through his window, casting a long shadow on the wall. As he sat there in the solitude of his living room, Robert Wallace was no longer just a retiree living his mundane life. He was a man on the precipice of a journey, stirred by the echoes of a past he thought he'd buried long ago. The sense of calm and comfort that defined Robert's life was about to be shattered, replaced with a desperate search for answers, spurred by a dream. Robert, still in his sleeping robe, made his decision. He was going to visit Emily's grave, a place he hadn't been to in years, a place where he hoped to find some peace, some answers. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. The weight of his decision, the nervous anticipation of what he might uncover, hung heavy in the air as he prepared for the day. But for the moment, the city of Stanleyville slept, oblivious to the turmoil building up in Robert Wallace's world. He sat quietly, staring at the first rays of the sun, the silence before the storm deafening. The stage was set, the curtain about to rise on the next act of Robert's life. And the day was just beginning. The morning sun peeked over the hills as Robert Wallace arrived at the cemetery on the outskirts of Stanleyville. The cemetery was a quiet oasis away from the city's daily humdrum, with tombstones and memorials dotting the landscape, each representing a story forever preserved in memory. Robert hadn't been here since the funeral. It was too painful, a vivid reminder of his irreplaceable loss. Yet today, he was drawn here by an inexplicable force that originated from his dream. As he walked through the narrow paths lined with stone monuments, Robert felt a chill running down his spine, a sense of foreboding that tightened his chest. He approached Emily's grave, his heart pounding against his ribs, his palms sweaty. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, but he was driven by an insatiable need to understand. The sight that met his eyes made his blood run cold. Emily's grave was disturbed, the earth around it scattered as if it had been unearthed. Robert stumbled back, clutching his heart. The sight was an undeniable, shocking desecration of his daughter's resting place. It was as if the universe itself was affirming the disturbing message from his dream. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His dream wasn't merely a product of his grief-stricken mind. It was a premonition, a distress call that led him here. A turmoil of emotions threatened to overwhelm him, fear and dread mixed with a strange sense of anticipation. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, "Daddy, I need to tell you something important." He felt drawn to the disturbed earth, a strange allure that tugged at his heart. Dropping to his knees, he started brushing away the dirt, his hands shaking. Each movement was a silent prayer, a plea to the universe for understanding. The sight that met his eyes was more than startling. It was an enigma, a tangible mystery waiting to be unraveled. Emily's casket was empty. It was an unfathomable reality that sent Robert's mind spiraling into confusion. He felt his heart beat in his throat, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the open, vacant space. It was as if Emily had vanished, leaving behind only a gaping hole that echoed his own emptiness. A desperate need to find answers surged within him. He rushed back to his car, his mind racing. The police needed to be informed. But who would believe his story? The grave was robbed, it was the most logical explanation, but there was a detail that made him question this. Emily's skeleton had both her arms intact, a fact that contradicted the accident reports which stated that Emily had lost an arm in the accident. Back in his car, Robert took deep breaths, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As he drove towards the police station, his mind was filled with questions. Questions that seemed to challenge reality itself. The image of Emily's grave etched in his mind, the mystery it represented was a puzzle he needed to solve. A sense of dread washed over him as he parked his car outside the Stanleyville police station. The mundanity of the building contrasted sharply with the turmoil brewing inside him. Gathering his courage, he stepped out of the car, the cold morning breeze ruffling his thinning hair. As he pushed open the door to the station, the harsh fluorescence seemed to echo his feeling of entering into an entirely different world, one where the lines between dreams and reality were blurred. The day had started ordinarily enough for Robert Wallace, a retiree with a simple life. But as he stood there, he was a man consumed by a mystery that threatened to turn his world upside down. Little did he know that his life was about to take a drastic turn, a turn that would change everything he thought he knew. Robert was about to step into the unknown, driven by a desire for the truth, a mystery that stemmed from a grave and a dream. The story was only just beginning. Robert stood on the creaky wooden floors of the Stanleyville police station, feeling lost and helpless. Across the dusty desk cluttered with coffee mugs and heaps of paper, Inspector Williams looked at him with an expression of perplexed boredom. The inspector was a gruff man in his mid-50s, the harsh lines of his face accentuated by years of hard work and worry. "I see," Williams said, reclining in his chair and steepling his fingers. His voice held an undertone of skepticism. "You're saying that your daughter's grave was disturbed, the casket is empty, and that she had both her arms intact?" Robert nodded, his throat dry. He repeated the details, his voice breaking. He spoke of the vivid dream, the disturbed grave, and the perplexing detail about Emily's skeleton. Williams listened, his gray eyes reflecting a mixture of patience and incredulity. "The autopsy reports state your daughter lost an arm in the accident, Robert," Williams pointed out, his tone placating. "People have strange dreams, especially after losing someone close to them. As for the disturbed grave, it's probably the work of grave robbers. Happens more often than you'd think." Robert shook his head. "You're not hearing me, Williams," he insisted, slamming his hand on the desk. Emily had both her arms intact. "I saw it. And why would grave robbers take the body and not the valuables in the casket?" Williams sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's a strange detail, Robert. But we can't discount the possibility that you're mistaken. The lighting, your state of mind, things can get distorted." It was a dismissive response. Robert felt a growing sense of frustration. He had come here seeking help, only to be met with skepticism. The people who were supposed to help him seemed more inclined to dismiss his concerns. "Are you going to investigate?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll look into it, Robert," Williams replied. "We'll send someone to check the cemetery. But you must prepare yourself for the fact that this might not lead where you're hoping." Williams' words felt like a cold splash of water. Robert was in an unfamiliar situation, forced to consider the possibility that he was chasing shadows. But he couldn't dismiss what he had seen. The dream, the disturbed grave, Emily's skeleton, they were pieces of a puzzle that were begging to be solved. With a curt nod, Robert left the station. The sun had risen higher, the morning air growing warmer. But Robert felt a chill. The police's dismissal had thrown him into a turmoil. He felt an urge to take matters into his own hands. He spent the rest of the day poring over Emily's belongings. Old photographs, school reports, her favorite toys. He was looking for a clue, something that could lead him closer to the truth. The images of Emily's smiling face were a stark contrast to the mystery that her life had become. With each passing hour, Robert felt more and more driven by a single-minded determination. He was stepping into the unknown, guided by a desire for truth that was becoming an obsession. As night fell, Robert made a decision. If the police wouldn't investigate properly, he would. Emily deserved that much. His heart pounded in his chest as he prepared himself for the journey ahead. He felt as if he was standing on the precipice of a deep abyss, staring into the unknown. But he was driven by the thought of Emily, her voice echoing in his mind, leading him towards a path shrouded in mystery. Robert was stepping into a world of uncertainty, where dreams, death, and deception intertwined. He was about to plunge into a mystery that was as dark and deep as the night itself. But he was ready. For Emily, he would delve into the depths of the unknown, chasing the truth that lay hidden in the shadows. The quiet night outside offered no comfort, only an eerie silence that echoed his solitude. But Robert was undeterred. His resolve was set in stone. No matter what, he would uncover the truth about Emily. Even if it meant venturing into the unknown, he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The story was far from over. It was only just beginning. There was an eerie silence hanging in the air as Robert knocked on the wooden door of his ex-son-in-law's house. He hadn't spoken to Roger since Emily's funeral. The thought of his daughter's husband always brought back painful memories, but Robert had to push through the hurt. He needed answers. Roger answered the door, his face a mixture of surprise and discomfort. He was a tall man, with a well-groomed beard and dark eyes that held a hint of suspicion. His life had moved on, and the sight of him stirred a deep resentment in Robert's heart. Emily's father was stepping into the lion's den, and he felt his palms go sweaty with nervousness. "Robert," Roger greeted, a forced smile on his face. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk, Roger," Robert stated, his voice firm. The two men sat in Roger's living room, the tension thick in the air. Robert's gaze flitted around the room, falling on the family pictures adorning the walls. It was then that he noticed her, a woman in several photos with Roger who bore a striking resemblance to Emily. Her name was Mary, Roger's second wife. "She looks like Emily," Robert stated, pointing at the photo. Roger shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "A lot of people have said that," he admitted, his eyes darting away. His reaction only fueled Robert's growing suspicion. There was something Roger wasn't telling him. Something important. They spoke for a while, Robert asking questions about Emily, the accident, and her death. Roger was evasive, defensive, and his answers did little to assuage Robert's suspicions. The meeting ended on a tense note, leaving Robert with more questions than he had come with. Walking away from Roger's house, Robert was engulfed by a wave of emotions. He was fighting against the tide of doubts and questions. The striking resemblance between Emily and Mary. Roger's discomfort. The unresolved mystery of the disturbed grave. It was a complex puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. But Robert was not one to back down. He had to adapt. To investigate. For Emily's sake. Back at his house, Robert dived into his own investigation. He pored over Emily's photos and letters, compared them with the images of Mary he had taken on his phone. The more he looked, the more he was convinced that there was a connection. He saw Emily in Mary, her smile, the way she tilted her head, even her handwriting. It was like looking at a ghost, and it sent chills down his spine. Days turned into nights, and nights into days as Robert's life was consumed by his investigation. He dug into Mary's past, hunted for information, and contacted her acquaintances. His determination was met with brick walls at every turn, but Robert was relentless. He was adapting to his new role, turning from a grieving father into an amateur detective. Despite the setbacks, Robert's resolve never faltered. He knew he was onto something. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, albeit slowly. He could see a picture forming of deceit, lies, and a shocking secret. But there were still gaps, pieces of the puzzle that eluded him. As Robert delved deeper into the mystery, he felt a sense of dread creeping in. He was venturing into dangerous territory. But his desire to uncover the truth was stronger than his fear. He had already lost Emily. He couldn't lose her again, not even her memory. He had to adapt, to investigate, to dig until he found the truth. The early morning sun cast a long shadow in Robert's study as he sat down to consolidate his findings. He had made notes, connected dots, and sought patterns over the past few days. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, and the image they painted was not pretty. Roger's evasive answers and inconsistencies in his stories were beginning to make sense. But the truth, it seemed, was more complicated than Robert had ever imagined. Taking a deep breath, he looked over the notes he had made on Mary. She had been a bit of an enigma. The pictures with Roger and her shared resemblance with Emily were undeniably eerie. It made his skin crawl and his mind race with possibilities, none of which brought him any comfort. Remembering his confrontational visit to Roger's house, he recalled how his former son-in-law had been quick to brush off the similarities between Emily and Mary. Roger had also stated that Mary had passed away recently, but when Robert had asked for details, Roger's stories were inconsistent, filled with gaping holes. He had been vague about her illness, her treatment, and the circumstances of her death. Each evasive answer fueled Robert's suspicions, solidifying his belief that Roger was hiding something. Pushed by his growing mistrust, Robert made the decision to go further. He took out his phone and dialed the number of an old friend who worked as a medical examiner. It was a long shot, but if anyone could help him unravel the mystery surrounding Mary's death, it would be him. His friend, Dr. Sarah Benson, was initially surprised to hear from him after so long, but as he explained his concerns, she became quiet. He pleaded with her to check on Mary's cause of death and, after a few seconds of silence, Sarah agreed. The waiting was agonizing. Each passing minute felt like an eternity as Robert paced restlessly in his study. When his phone finally buzzed, he nearly dropped it in his hurry to answer. Sarah's voice on the other end was steady, but there was a tension in it that made his heart hammer in his chest. Mary's cause of death had been declared as a brain aneurysm. However, upon checking hospital records, Sarah found no evidence of Mary being admitted for such an issue or any medical treatment in the past year. Robert's heart sank. This was the damning piece of evidence he had been dreading and hoping for in equal measures. The truth was unfolding, but it was far from liberating. The darkness of deceit was deepening, and Robert felt like he was being sucked into it. Roger's lies, the similar physical features between Emily and Mary, the disturbed grave, and now this medical inconsistency. The pieces were falling into place, creating a terrifying image. As Robert hung up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. The web of deceit was unraveling, and he was in the center of it. The implications were horrifying, but there was no turning back now. He was getting what he wanted, the truth. But at what cost? His determination, however, did not waver. The picture of Emily on his desk seemed to spur him on. His mind was made up. He would see this through, no matter how bitter the truth. The chapter ended with Robert, more determined than ever, ready to confront Roger with his findings. His daughter's memory deserved nothing less. Night had fallen. A thick, inky blackness cloaked the cemetery, interrupted only by the fleeting flash of Robert's torch. His heart pounded against his rib cage as the reality of what he was about to do sank in. This was illegal, morally wrong on so many levels. But the thirst for truth, for justice for his daughter, left him with little choice. The shovel felt cold and heavy in his hands. He stood at Mary's gravesite, staring at the freshly turned earth. He swallowed hard, pushed down the rising bile of anxiety, and started to dig. He labored under the cloak of darkness, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. His hands were blistered, his back aching from the exertion, but the thought of Emily kept him going. With each scoop of earth, he moved closer to the answers that lay beneath the cold soil. Hours passed in silence, only punctuated by the harsh scraping of the shovel and his ragged breaths. Finally, he hit something solid. His heart skipped a beat, the metallic clang of the shovel against the coffin echoing in his ears. He crouched down, wiped his sweaty palms on his pants, and carefully opened the casket. He braced himself for the sight, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay inside. It was a body, but not Mary's. It was a stranger, a woman he had never seen before. Robert felt his breath catch in his throat. The implications of what he had uncovered were grave. He stood there, staring down at the unknown face, his mind racing. His actions were beginning to take a toll. He had crossed a line, desecrated a grave, uncovered a deception that pointed towards a horrific truth. He had acted out of desperation, out of love for his lost child, but the law would not see it that way. As Robert reburied the stranger, he was confronted with a cold, hard reality. His search for answers had led him down a path from which there was no return. He was paying the price for truth, one that was turning out to be far steeper than he had ever imagined. Returning home, he was a shell of the man he used to be. He barely recognized the haunted face that stared back at him in the mirror. This was not just about Emily anymore, it was about a conspiracy that ran deeper and darker than he had ever anticipated. His hands shook as he dialed the police. He was about to turn himself in, confess his actions. The wait was agonizing, each passing second amplifying the dread clawing at his insides. When the line connected, he was met with the curt voice of a dispatch officer. Robert took a deep breath and started speaking. His voice trembled, but the resolve in his words was unwavering. He was ready to pay the price. The morning after his clandestine excavation, Robert found himself walking through the sterile halls of the local police station. A sense of grim determination replaced the fear that had consumed him earlier. He was ready to confess his actions and reveal the twisted mystery he had unwittingly unearthed. He was led into a small interrogation room, its bare walls painted a dreary gray. Across from him sat Detective Mark Harper, a seasoned officer known for his gruff exterior and brilliant investigative skills. The older man looked at Robert with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I've done something illegal," Robert began, his voice betraying his nervousness. He recounted the night's events, the discovery of the foreign body in Mary's grave, and his growing suspicion about Emily's death. At first, Harper's face reflected incredulity, but as Robert's narrative unfolded, the detective's eyes narrowed, the glint of intrigue replacing the initial skepticism. The older man leaned back, his hardened face softening as he absorbed the gravity of Robert's words. "Mr. Wallace," Harper began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" "Because I didn't think you'd believe me," Robert answered honestly, his tired eyes meeting Harper's. "Because I thought I could handle it on my own." There was a silence, then Harper nodded. "You should have trusted us, Robert. But now that you've come forward, we'll do everything we can to uncover the truth." Relief washed over Robert like a cleansing tide, the weight of his secret and the guilt of his actions somewhat alleviated by Harper's assurance. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a chance for justice, after all. As he left the police station, the world seemed a little less hostile. The sun broke through the lingering clouds, casting its warm rays onto the gray pavement. Robert felt the first stirrings of relief, but also a growing sense of dread. The truth was about to unravel, and he feared what it would reveal. Days blurred into weeks as the police investigation began to unravel a tangled web of deception surrounding Emily's death. A report from the forensic department confirmed Robert's worst fears: Emily had indeed died a week earlier than reported. It was a heart-wrenching confirmation that shook Robert to his core. The question of why Roger had lied, however, remained an enigma. Robert sat alone in his study, the only light source being the dim glow from his desk lamp. The room was filled with Emily's memories, a collection of family photos, her school awards, her favorite childhood books, each item a reminder of his precious daughter's stolen life. He felt a gaping hole in his heart, an aching emptiness that reverberated through the silent room. Tears welled up in Robert's eyes, but he brushed them away. His sorrow was now laced with an unyielding determination. Emily had been wronged, and he was intent on bringing justice for his daughter. "I'll make sure you get justice, Emily," Robert whispered, clutching a framed picture of his daughter close to his chest. "I promise." The man who had once lived a quiet, unassuming life was no more. He was not just a grieving father now, he was a warrior, a guardian seeking justice for his fallen child. The abyss of deception and uncertainty had changed him, shaped him into a man willing to fight against all odds. As Robert delved into his newfound resolve, a steely determination reflected in his tear-filled eyes. The chapter ended, leaving readers to anticipate what this changed man would do next. Would he confront Roger directly? Or would he put his faith in the law enforcement he had once doubted? What more secrets would this complex tale of deceit unveil? And amidst all this, could Robert find peace, justice for Emily, and a resolution to his heart-wrenching saga? Robert was now a familiar face at the precinct. Inspector Barnes had become an unlikely ally, sharing Robert's dogged determination to uncover the truth. Despite the potential backlash, Robert felt relieved at the turn of events. A sense of closure seemed on the horizon, even if it was one tinged with pain and loss. "Robert, we've gotten a break," Inspector Barnes called one day, his voice crackling through the phone with urgency. The details were sickening. A discrepancy in the hospital records led them to an unassuming nurse who had been bribed to fudge Emily's time of death. Roger had a dark secret, a life insurance policy in Emily's name that paid out only after a certain date. "He killed my Emily for money?" Robert's voice was a whisper, his disbelief echoing through the room. But there was no time for shock. The police were closing in on Roger, the net tightening around the man who had taken his daughter from him. When the moment finally came, Robert found himself standing outside Roger's house, his heart pounding in his chest. Barnes, and a squad of uniformed officers, were ready to make the arrest. Seeing Roger in handcuffs, the veneer of the cordial, friendly man stripped away to reveal the cold, calculating monster beneath was simultaneously devastating and relieving. He had been right about Roger, but the cost of his vindication was Emily's life. As Roger was escorted to the squad car, he turned to look at Robert, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. But Robert felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only the sharp sting of loss and the gnawing emptiness of a life forever altered. Months passed, and Roger's trial was a media circus. Robert's quiet life was now subject to the glare of public scrutiny, but he remained steadfast. When the guilty verdict came, it brought no celebration, only a sense of heavy justice, and the comfort of knowing that Emily's killer would pay for his heinous act. In the aftermath, Robert found a newfound purpose in advocating for victims' rights, transforming his painful loss into a force for good. He worked tirelessly, channeling his grief into action, making sure Emily's death wasn't in vain. The Robert who walked into the sunset was no longer the simple man from the first chapter. He was a fighter, a survivor, a beacon of strength amidst tragedy. He had plumbed the depths of his pain and had come out stronger, turning his grief into a mission. His daughter's loss had broken him, but also rebuilt him, driving him to seek justice, not just for Emily, but for others who might fall prey to such unthinkable crimes. His journey had been one of devastating loss, relentless pursuit of truth, and the ultimate quest for justice. The final chapter thus ends not with an absolute closure, but with a promise. A promise of a man forever changed, a man who, despite his loss, chose to rise, chose to fight, chose to make a difference. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the last lines echoed the resilience of a father's love, a testament to Robert's indomitable spirit. For Emily, I will keep fighting, always. Did you like this story? Comment below what you think and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.